Wi-Fi. Oh, there we are. Good morning to you, my friends, wherever you may be in the world today. Alan Clements here from blessed Ubud, Bali. From my heart to yours. Today is a day in the life, February 20th, Tuesday, here in Bali and wherever you may be across this great planet of ours, convulsing and loving and all the various things that life does. So welcome to today. Today's sharing is Dharma Artistry. I'm going to share how I live into those two words, what they mean to me. And the second label, portal of the talk in the title, Cognitive Aesthetics and Creativity. Dharma Artistry, Cognitive Aesthetics, and Creativity, in a way, as I'm thinking and feeling, as I listen to myself think and feel and share, how I embody artistry, creativity, and aesthetics within the emotional, psychological, cognitive palette, if you will, of states of mind. Many of you who know me over the years know that states of consciousness, SOCs and SOM, states of mind, are for me very analogous to the energetics of color, the spectrum of color. We all know back in the 16-something or other, the original psychonaut, Sir Isaac Newton, got carried away with his psychedelic self-therapy and brought that, Pink Floyd pyramid right in front of that curtain with a little hole in it, and it refracted the intrinsic spectrum within light, clear light, luminous light, transparent light, that it wasn't just light. It was this spectrum. And I'm really into spectrum. And I've used this word, this phrase, as a way of safeguarding my own proclivity towards denial, deception, certainty, overconfidence, if you will, the ensnarement, the entrapment of popularized ideas that translate towards transactional presence. No offense to any of the ways in which we survive and live through money and resources and goods and trade. But spectrum for me keeps me connected to why I am in love and in hate, in miraculous, maddening connection to being a human, is that it's an unoptional. I mean, I like to say that I've tried suicide. I failed. I've tried euthanasia. I almost did it. But nonetheless, you're kind of in an unoptional interrelatedness with existence all the time, to state the unthinkable, obvious entrapment that comes with awakening to the reality of your context. I'm just so hip and down and dope with that awakening process. I'm not really a spinner of like it's glorious and it's mystical and it's magnificent and it's beautiful. I mean, just pause, Alan, just, all around the world today, to state the obvious, there are millions and billions of boys and girls and men and women, and including all the animals and the trees. There's just the spectrum of bliss to horror. And cognitive aesthetics and Dharma artistry and creativity keep me in hope. As an artist, I don't identify with being a former Buddhist monk or a former investigative journalist or spoken word artist. I identify with just simply being a human that loves to wake up most of the time and engage existence some of the time with a creative, almost rad swag desire to be the best that I can be in the dance, the music, the song, the poetry, the theater of my own inner beingness in context with life and other. How someone shows up with me is often felt as their creativity, their honesty, their authenticity, their unthinkable, truth-telling freedom in dynamic action, creative aesthetics. Not how well they right now. Back, namaste, that kind of thing. We've got a very disrupted Wi-Fi connection here today. However, how to get more engaged in the meaning of Dharma artistry. The way you go about doing whatever you do in the day, it can be compulsory, it can be formulaic, it can be unknowingly conditioned to the point where the next thing you know, the day has gone by and you wonder how it is that you did what you did, except that you did it somewhat formulaically. You have done it even mindfully to so-called deeply adapt to the conditionings of anxiety and stress to empower that edge of confluence because of the need for X amount of dollars that you make at the end of the month or the year to cover the need to live where you live. That kind of conditioning. And of course, are you living in the frequency of the personalized artistry of your chosen way, of the way in which you look at your child, your pet, your plant, the flower of life, read a book, sit in meditation? Is it compulsory? Are you doing your yoga as a kind of ongoing habit to maintain flexibility? Or are you back deeply in the artistry of your own present time presence within your body, within real time here and now? What does artistry mean? What does creativity mean? I didn't really know until I took anti-acting lessons. I thought that meditation would relieve me of the burden of pretense, but it sort of exploited it in many ways. And I'm not criticizing it or criticizing me, but it's interesting how shadow creeps into light. And when I did anti-acting voice lessons, because I wanted to do improvisational theater, which meant no pretense, minimize acting, minimize rehearsal, minimize, you doing what you do, Alan, to entertain someone else to make a good living so that you can do it again and 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 again. And you got a really polished stand-up act of 20 minutes. Now you do it again and 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 again, right? I ask myself, where did Diary of Anne Frank come from? The beloved savant, radical, courageous, ethically wise young lady living up there in the dungeon of a gift given to her and her family, knowing all along, will I live, will I die, die. Where in the heart of creativity to pen that radical diary of awakening and creativity, right? That's moral courage to live your truth in the body that you have. I was once with my grandmother as a young man. I always adored her. She was like way up there in age, and I was kind of always way down there in age. And I was talking to her, and I was on my way to India. And she noticed that I was looking over her shoulder in the living room where I spent a lot of time when she came to America from Lebanon and Syria. And beyond the backstory of who we are and where we've come from, she saw me looking over her. Audio isn't broad. flow connection. I guess that's, I don't know whether anyone can hear or see, but I'm just going to carry on and trust that what I'm saying actually is, so be it. And I was with, back again. And I was looking over her shoulder in the living room of our family home in Boston. And there she was with her husband, my grandfather, and a young little girl with her who happened to be my aunt. I didn't know that at the time. I'm surprised that I missed seeing this epic photograph in the living room of the house that I spent a lot of time in. And she noticed that I was noticing other than her eye and her heart and our communication. And she looked up over her shoulder and says, "Oh, wow." And I said, "Who is that?" And I said, "Well, that's me with your grandfather when I first came to Boston from New York, and from that steamer ship across the great Atlantic from our homeland of Lebanon and Syria way back in the day." And I asked her, "How old were you?" And she thought back, and I was, well, my goodness, it was a ways back. And I counted the years as she did to me. I think it was like 5 or 6 decades before. Hard to get those words out of your mouth, she said, and it just seemed like last week to me, with a radiant smile of having lived the good life. And I'm thinking of like, wow, how well do I live? To me is another way of looking at Dharma Artistry, of how I go about the canvas of the hour, the month, the day, and bringing, I use the word cognition, in the aesthetics of consciousness, rather than me being mindful and meditating and doing inner Dharma yoga and authenticity and timelessness and happiness, but the aesthetics. Every one of us, I guarantee you, honor and respect or reject the way in which you're touched, looked at, kissed, and held. It has to be on mutual terms, and it has to be as much as humanly possible in the communion of aesthetics. You want to be loved in a way in which you feel not only special and unique, but that the person, the people that you're with, you, the way you're with yourself, and the partner or the semi-partner, about to be partner, or the trans partner, whomever, there is a care for the artistry of the kiss, the touch, the way in which you overlap and immerse in the feelings of love, uniquely the way you love, uniquely is the key ingredient of aesthetics and creativity. And how many nuns and monks I would see in the monastery that did things according to the Buddha's teaching, rather than one's own unique understanding of a timeless direction towards states of mind, not Buddhism, not Dharma in a carved out cave of artifacts, but a pointing to your own inner mind. And therein lies where we challenge, revolutionarily challenge, politically challenge, culturally challenge, socially challenge, this deep invenerating proclivity, primarily of men, but not just men. I don't want to disgender, it's more about numbness and feeling, towards patriarchy, authoritarianism, autocratic presence. And how many, to state something so obvious, how many wars have been, how many bloodlettings, how many genocides, viral genocide today, go on because of the lack of a feminine-inspired aesthetic within the consciousness of one's heart that empowers the artistry of communication over denigration, destruction, death, and the certainty of my F-U-C-K nationalism over your fucking terrorism. The absolute abolishment of nuance. Artistry. It brings you back into nuance, uniqueness, novelty. How many of us love the way in which we watched, perhaps, or felt, and I use this, the way in which your mother brushed your hair when you were a child, or my grandmother caressed my head before I went to bed as a young boy, how she told me stories, how she told me poems that left not only the deep impression of the words, but how she did what she did. The motivation of love that was intrinsic in the shared space. The artistry of caring. One of my deepest, dearest friends, I wrote them down in my heart today just to remind myself, my mentors, all of them Burmese, Aung San Suu Kyi, the Nobel Peace Laureate, imprisoned today in a global witch hunt, global witch burning. Her mentor, U Thien U, a dear friend of mine, former general of the army under the dictator who turned towards Gandhi and renounced violence and became the country's most embodied nonviolent activist. He shared those teachings of nonviolent heart artistry with his people. A former general turned from natural born killer to redemption of heart. And he did it within this intimate, nuanced, he told me over many decades, courageous engagement with these invenerating conditions that he picked up, he said, from God and the devil, that he laughed about in his own human heart, the DNA of this whole thing that we're in, along with 121 years of British imperialistic domination. Those colonialists that came to Burma, Winston Churchill's father, the head of India at the time, Governor General, had said, let's take Burma and give it to the White Queen. And they did it with 3 wars and denigration and people. I picked up a habit, Alan, from the white oppressors of dominating, and I took it out on my own people, like domestic violence on a national level. He had a wit about him, a satire about him, a swag, a rad, a revolutionary cool, an artistry. He took responsibility. Another quality for me of Dharma Artistry, I would use the word sparingly, radical self-reliance, radical self-responsibility. We cannot talk about responsibility and self without talking about what? Transparency. And I love people who totally not reveal everything. We have a right to our frontal vortex and a right to our subconscious. Authenticity doesn't mean spilling the beans on everything you don't know and know. Appropriateness, skillfulness, but he took responsibility. He had an artistry of redemption. He said, Alan, it took time, it took imprisonment. I turned my 21 years of imprisonment into an art form of dealing with tragedy every day of my life with the food and no mosquito net, no damn pot to pee in. He'd laugh about it. Remember when you complained as a monk about your stomach and the pain you were in and you felt you were going to die and you got back to the monastery and they gave you antibiotics and you thought you were Jesus walking on water? Well, in a prison, they don't give you antibiotics. They give you unremitting hell. No blankets, no mosquito nets. You ask me how I got through the darkest times? Don't personalize it. That meant even mindfulness became almost like, what? Mindfulness couldn't even fend off the horror of isolation and that little deep and venerating attitude being a victim, Alan. That's the language you use in your psychological world back in the West, right? Victims. And here I was, a revolutionary leader. And so what I did, my jailer snuck in verses of Jesus. I didn't know much about JC. I was a Buddhist. Forgive them, he said to me on camera, for they know not what they do. I thought about that. I know not what I do. The grace of overcoming one's own pride, arrogance. There's something so artistic about that. It's not just moral courage and mindfulness and I'm developing insight and wisdom and I've done psychedelic therapy up the wazoo. It's a grace there, grace and uniqueness and artistry and cognitive aesthetics. Every one of us have a way in which we do what we do every day of our life. And to empower that aesthetic, mimicking was the number one preventative in a monastery to the number one obstacle for people in evolving their insight and their wisdom and their freedom. This is what I learned from my teachers and my guides over many decades in Burma. The unrecognized pretense to conform. In a way that I hold myself somewhat, Alan, you are a nonconformist, but you could actually empower nonconformity as a kind of dogma. the trauma of rebelliousness, right? The trauma of maverickness. But that artistry is like, every little spoken word riff. I've stopped memorizing these talks way back, and I don't care anymore. I think about how I'm perceived, unless you want to reject me more than I reject myself. And if you really want to do, ask me how I reject myself, because whatever you do, creep, doesn't even touch the way that I reject myself. The artistry of compassion, self-compassion in art, cognitive aesthetics, the way in which you hold yourself. One of the greatest overlooked traditions of the Dharma, of yoga, of philosophy, of psychology for me, is just self-compassion. Just playing at that edge.